We are here to talk about assessments within CBE and then talk about this thing called artificial intelligence. But again, I'm glad y'all could join us. My name is Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director for Academic Services and Client Success at Strut Learning. And I've been in the space of competency-based for 20 years, 15 years, something like that. It's been a long time. But I know there's other people on this call that have also been in that space for a very long time, and I would like them to go ahead and introduce themselves. So when we have Dr. Monica Shukla-Belmontes, and so would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, perfect. I'm Dr. Monica Shukla-Belmontes with the University of Massachusetts Global. I've been working in the competency-based area since 2014. We've launched about 5 or 6 programs in the CBE type modality with the Strut Learning platform. And my background area relates to curriculum, assurance of learning, and also competency-based education, tutorial faculty affairs. So really looking at those pieces as well. So designing our curriculum, implementing our curriculum, and then working with our students, faculty, and internal teams. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Monica. And then I would like Dr. MJ Bishop to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm MJ Bishop. I'm Vice President for Integrative Learning Design at UMGC, University of Maryland Global Campus. We're one of 12 institutions in the University System of Maryland, fully standalone accredited 4-year public higher ed institution, but almost entirely asynchronous online. We also serve military populations overseas in Asia and Europe, and it's kind of got our start there. I oversee a group that supports the schools in the design and delivery of our online curriculum across the entire range of activities. I'm probably less directly experienced in what might be called true CBE, in the sense of, programs and courses that allow time to vary and mastery to remain constant. But have been giving a lot of thought to what that looks like at a public higher ed institution and the ways in which we can be thinking about it. I have instead been talking quite a bit, and Rhonda and I were having a conversation the other day about competency-based curriculum design and how we think about that at our campuses when we aren't in a position to be able to embrace true CBE programs. So looking forward to the conversation, and turn it back over to you, Rhonda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we also have Dr. Kurt Linberg with us. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Rhonda. Kurt Linberg, I think I've been doing this for a long time, more like authentic assessment in my push at Capella 24 years ago, right? How can you teach IT without having them do programming and that kind of stuff? Sometime at Western Governors, and I really believe in competency-based, and I've been helping clients as an independent consultant now for like 7 years. And I like working with smaller community colleges and getting them started with helping them with accreditation and getting the competencies in line and the assessments and things like that.
Wonderful, thank you. So as you see, we have an amazing panel with us today and really starting to try to dig into assessment. So just to backtrack a little bit, if you've been part of our webinar series that we've been doing for the past few months, we did start off talking about what is this competency-based stuff and how do you get started with it, going into how do you look at accreditation and how do you develop competencies and courses. Now we're down to that assessment level. And definitely all of those different webinars have been recorded, so you can always go back and check them out. But really thinking about assessments, I believe that with competency-based assessments, besides those competencies, is kind of that core. And you have to be able to show what is your mastery of those competencies. So I actually want to kind of throw this to you, Monica, to begin with, and talk about how do you come up, one, with those competencies, and then how do you develop those assessments to make sure people are competent in what they're doing?
Absolutely. So we've looked at using the degree qualifications profile, so DQP. We've also looked at using the AAC&U values rubrics as well as a foundation. And what we started with were 3 different levels. We had level 1 assessments, which were objective, multiple choice, using a Proctor Now software. And so that one, students had to master the competency by demonstrating that they had 80% or higher on that final assessment. They have 3 attempts to complete that assessment. And then the option 2 would be level 2 competencies, which are more project-based. So those competencies requiring oral communication, for example, written communication, we thought there would be strength in having them actually present an oral presentation for that competency or write a paper for the written communications competency, so on. And then we have a 3rd level as well called certification assessments. And those are primarily in our IT area where we've mapped our course and everything back to what would be like UCertify, CompTIA, those existing certifications that are out in the field that give our students the ability to use their direct knowledge, apply it, demonstrate their mastery, and walk away with a certificate that is industry recognized. So that's where we started. Over time, we took a look at our level 1 objective assessments in the Proctor Now software and decided that actually the direction that AAC&U recommends, and that's the American Association of Colleges and Universities, was that really looking at that demonstration of mastery from project-based learning. And so we actually decided to move towards all project-based assessments, except for IT, which still contain those certification competencies as well. So now we have those 2 levels of project-based and certifications, and it's been really effective in terms of a process for us.
That is amazing. So yeah, it's, I think the longer we've come with competency based, especially in this online self-paced environment, I've seen a shift more to that project based, making sure that you hands-on can show that you have those competencies. But then you think about things like philosophy and, those more not as tangible competencies that you're looking at. Kurt, can you talk a little bit about maybe how you have worked with clients and faculty members to help guide them to knowing what they need to be putting together assessment wise to meet competencies?
It really boils down to working with the employers to get a handle on what they're expecting that student to be able to know and do. And in the soft skills area or the critical thinking, you can map that into the job that they might be doing. So maybe it's resolving a customer complaint. So you show a video of somebody not doing a very good job as a customer service rep, and then show an example of how they not only diffuse the irritated customer, but now they have a really happy customer. And maybe there's some role playing and they have to actually show that they can apply some of these techniques. So the other thing I was thinking of is I've been doing more work with a lot of hands-on programs. So like aviation, where that student has to show that they can drill a perfect hole or put a rivet on to make sure the airplane is perfect, right? So there's a lot of psychomotor types of assessments that have to happen. So you front load a lot of the things online where they can do safety protocols and make sure that they understand how to be safe. They can see the actual activity being done, and then they go into the lab and they practice it until they can perform it perfectly. Yeah.
No, I love that. I was talking with someone the other day about, even something like nursing, where they have like hands-on, like if you can't actually draw blood, then do you really have that competency, even though you have the understanding of, okay, this is the steps that you would do, right? So being able to really show that competency and even if it's broken down into these are the sub-competencies that come underneath that. So when you think about that, breaking down those, I guess, sometimes it could be a learning outcome at a bigger level, going down into what are those skills or competencies that you would need to be doing. So MJ, I know y'all have done a lot of that, like with the military, right? Having to make sure that they understand all of those different pieces. How have you helped your faculty or instructional designers kind of break that down and align that with those?
Well, we don't teach military specific courses necessarily, so we're not at UMGC at least teaching those kinds of skills. We teach our regular program offerings, bachelor's and master's degree programs and so forth for military. But in terms of breaking down skills, terminal skills as we're calling them now, down into enabling skills and so forth. There are taxonomies out there that are helping to support that work, but what we're finding at UMGC is, and in the work that we're doing now, that we could spend an awful lot of time trying to get those taxonomies absolutely perfect. I agree with Monica that ACNU and several others have created some really great frameworks, but even then, breaking these things down into the component parts and truly understanding how all these things fit together is a difficult proposition. And I worry a little bit that sometimes we end up as academics spending so much time trying to get that absolutely perfect that the perfect becomes the enemy of the good and we get stalled. So we've been doing sort of a top down and a bottom up. We're working with like CAST and others to understand what sorts of skills are of interest out in the field to employers and other areas that our graduates may be going into. And at the same time, understanding the ways in which we're currently designing the instruction and where we are currently addressing skills and trying to bring those things together in the middle. I've been talking a lot about creating the Rosetta Stone between, the learning objectives and the things we're doing on our side and the actual language and terminology that employers are expecting our students to be able to use articulately and point to evidence of acquisition of those skills. So, we're working on that now. It's not easy. It's not pretty. It's going to be, I think, difficult, sometimes very mundane kind of work, but necessary. I think it's so necessary for everything that we're looking at on the horizon around easier transfer pathways, prior learning assessments. All these kinds of things are going to require that we understand what the puzzle pieces look like on our side, so that we know when you come to us, Rhonda, with your puzzle pieces, exactly where you fit in and the ways in which we can accommodate you and help to advance your learning towards your goals much more quickly.
Definitely. I love that, being able to really understand where your student's going, right? Where's the end point and what does that employer looking for, but also where is that employee or that student in that process, and being able to look at that. So I've had the pleasure of actually working at UMGC and really thinking about those steps and those skills that the students would actually need, and being able to create, and going back to what Kurt said, that authentic, what is the student actually going to be doing in the real world, and how can you map those together? So Monica, I know y'all have done a lot of work on this as you've gone through and built out more of your programs. Can you talk a little bit more about how do you determine those assessments and what that has looked like over time?
Right, absolutely. So when we look at our assessments, we want to make sure that we have alignment with our program learning outcomes, our institutional learning outcomes, and also the course learning outcomes. So what is that course or competency going to teach, and how does it scaffold up to what we want our students to walk away with in terms of skill sets as a graduate of our institution? So there's some areas like global diversity and communication skill sets and operations management, for example, within our School of Business, if that's the program that they're in, or IT knowledge. So we really try to make sure that we have that really clean alignment with our curriculum mappings and our framework. So it's very much a backwards design. We are almost starting with our final assessment in mind. We look at our course objectives. What do we want them to walk away with? And then the next step is, how do we build an assessment that tests and aligns with those course or competency learning outcomes. So how are we creating that direct one-to-one alignment? Then we backwards plan even further to look at what content and what activities and what types of formative assessments will help to support knowledge so that the student is very well prepared for that final assessment. We also have a framework with our tutorial faculty to assist as well. So they are not independently just working through the material. They have academic coaches, they have their tutorial faculty, they can ask questions. And really the strength that we've seen with our assessment process is using the Strut Learning platform. So what we're able to do is that our graders are able to go in there, see the student assignment, see what the instructions were, and we have both within that platform. It actually does show you each of the criteria. And we have a 4-level criteria, for example, for our assessments, so exemplary, proficient, developing, or emerging. And we're able to use that framework, and the students can see where they are meeting those objectives and where they may be just barely missing the mark in some areas and need some improvement. And that's really a great strength that we've seen with the platform's ability to have us as graders and faculty communicate with the students what the needs are. And so we're able to, again, itemize based on the criteria level within each assessment exactly where the strengths and weaknesses are and share that with the student. They get that immediate feedback and response. And then we develop a learning plan with the students that need some remediation in some areas. So it's been a really great strength to look at holistically what is the assessment framework and how do we get students to demonstrate that mastery overall.
And I actually really love the idea of really being able to help coach those students through that process, right? So you have all this alignment that you put together with that backwards design and with the employer in mind and all that, but then how do you make sure your students are getting there, right? And so Rob asked, is it, dispositions mapped against the CBE framework? Are they only hard skills? And I would actually say that they're actually also that soft and hard skills. You have to be able to look at both as you're taking students through that process. Going back kind of to Rob's question, Kurt, you kind of mentioned a little bit about, no matter what those skills are that you're looking at, you're really trying to figure out how that goes into the assessment. Can you talk a little bit more about how do you bring in those soft skills, but also those hard skills at the same time into the same assessment?
Well, I think a rubric could be used, right? That would call out the, what you're looking for in both those areas. Yeah.
So yeah, I love being able to use a rubric. Definitely. I know that. I've probably been using rubrics. I don't want to age myself for years, and I know right when I started using them, it made it so much clearer, not only to me but also the students, on what it is that they were supposed to go through and achieve, right, and how to do that. But if you look at, especially when you're looking at soft skills are a lot, sometimes harder because they're sometimes subjective and not quite as crystal clear as some of those harder skills that are a little bit more apparent. Thinking through that, one of the things that I know that lately, especially in the last 6 months, that a lot of people have been thinking about is, now, if we're looking at especially CBE with the understanding that students are supposed to be showing their competence, their level of understanding and ability to be able to do things. And now we have something called artificial intelligence that is coming into play here. And how is that going to affect how we are developing these assessments? How do we build those prompts or things to make sure that it is the student's abilities and not something else? So MJ, I know that you've been working a lot with artificial intelligence and really thinking through that, especially with assessments at UMGC and how to faculty kind of build those assessments. But I would love for you to kind of take a step back with us a little bit and talk about what is artificial intelligence and how does it actually work when it comes to, student work and what students are doing?
Well, this is a evolving topic. Obviously, things are changing day in and day out. But at its core, you know, we're used to what we've known with Google searches and other kinds of search engines in the past, where it searches for matches based on the string you've typed in, and does its best to give you that listing of things that are matches to that search string. Recently, we've started to see Google also provide a little bit of a summary at the top of all those things. But at the end of the day, it's mostly asking you now to go in and interrogate those sources that it has provided for you. Large language models, of which ChatGPT is one, gives you the beginning to end explanation. So it's no longer going out and matching things. It's using that knowledge base in the internet prior to, 2021, and now I guess the more recent versions are going all the way to the internet currently. But it's using its understanding of its having ingested all of that information to provide you with some sort of an explanation. So at the end of the day, though, it really is kind of at its most basic core. I've seen it referred to as a superpowered autocomplete. What it's doing is essentially creating and providing you with let's say, for example, the next word in a sequence that is of the highest probability. So one example that I've seen used, actually, it was a packback demo. They started with "not all heroes wear," and there was an empty space, and then it comes up with capes, pants, pajamas. Well, capes has an 80% probability, so it fills in capes as the next word. So you have not all heroes wear capes. And then the next word with the highest probability of being next in that sequence is but. And you go on through all the way down the sequence until you get to the end of a sentence that it has generated, so to speak. Not all heroes wear capes, but some do. This is math. It's statistics. It's probabilities. It's not thinking. So another way that I've heard this described was, suppose we give a large language model the prompt, "the first person to walk on the moon was blank," and suppose it responds, of course, Neil Armstrong. The question is, what are we really asking? That we're not really asking who was the first person to walk on the moon. What we're really asking the model is, given the statistical distribution of words in the vast public corpus of English text, what words are most likely to follow the sequence? What person to walk on the first person to walk on the moon was, and the highest statistical probability of the answer to that would be Neil Armstrong. So, we have to be realistic, understand going into this. This is not something that's thinking. This is something that's generating text based on probabilities. And that's essentially at the core, at least, of what large language models do. Now, they're getting more sophisticated, and there are other things that are being brought into play to help with it making those statistical analyses. But essentially, that's what it is. And that's how we end up with things like these hallucinations that it does. It's basing things on probabilities. So that's not it thinking in the way that humans do. And we also run into the issue of garbage in, garbage out. So, if in fact we're training a large language model on the whole corpus of the internet, as we know, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that I don't think we'd necessarily say could stand up to the rigors of scholarly interrogation and so forth. So, we have to be careful about what we're training large language models on. And it is very possible, and we've seen now quite a few examples of large language models, for example, that can be, trained on our libraries at our institutions, or trained on our policies at our institutions, and support students coming in that need help with advisement and those kinds of things. Those are relatively reliable, although sometimes it points out some of the problems in your policies as well. But those are relatively reliable things that we can train a large language model on. So, I think there's an awful lot of promise here, but an awful lot of things too that we have to be aware of as we're thinking about the use of AI in anything that we're doing as educators, both in terms of the ways in which we're relying on it to generate assessments, but also the ways in which we're asking our students to rely upon it in order to advance their learning.
No, I think that is a great way to actually look at it, to really understand what AI is doing. And then stepping back, thinking about, I see a lot of chat going on with, when do we use AI? What does that look like? And I do agree that AI is with us and we're going to be using it in the workforce. And I mean, I can tell you, I have used it to put together some descriptions of certain things. And, but I think that understanding where that information is coming from from a student's viewpoint, I think is really important, because if you understand that it is the probability that this is how it's going to be put together, then when you read it, you understand that concept. But one of the things that I think there's two pieces to that. One is through those formative assessments. So we've been kind of talking more about summative assessments, right? But through those formative assessments, getting students to the point where they hopefully are mastering or achieving those competencies, I think the use of AI is incredibly important, as we are having to deal with that no matter what. It's going to be there. People are going to be using it, and can we use it to get people started on thinking through how maybe a paper should be put together? I don't know. What are y'all thoughts on that? I'm going to just kind of throw it out there instead.
Yeah, we are.
Go ahead, Monica.
Oh, sure. We're just exploring AI, so we're kind of at the introductory stages of this, and specifically what you mentioned there with just responses to the students and being as responsive as possible. And so one of the things we're looking at in terms of formatives is, can AI help to provide some of the feedback to students on their questions? Currently, we have an Ask the Expert feature within the Start Learning platform, so students can almost virtually raise their hand and our faculty members will respond. Some of these questions are very generic responses, where it's, how do I access the library? Or maybe it's more content specific, but it's kind of targeted on a certain area. And AI could assist our faculty members in these responses, with the faculty members still reviewing if needed or anything like that. So not grading assessments, but more providing helpful resources, responses, and feedback. But I'll pass it to you, Kurt. I think maybe you have more experience in this area.
So when I have too much work that I can handle, I bring in some designers to help move some courses along. And faculty are so busy, right? So what we'd like to do is provide drafts, like, what do you think about these quiz questions? What do you think about these course learning outcomes? What do you think about this type of project-based assessment? It's an easier place to start than if we're pushing it back on them. And what we're finding is we could use GPT for starting this. Like, get a bunch of simple test questions for this, or like in a marketing class, right? Intro to marketing. You can ask for a marketing plan and see what you get, and that might be factored into an assignment. It's not perfect, but it's a template. And like you were saying, Rhonda, students, when they get into a workplace, they're not going to be expected to start from scratch. They have to take on and be as productive as possible. So it's a template. It's not going to cut it as far as meeting mastery of building a marketing plan for a small business doing XYZ, but it's a great place for the student to start. As well, it's a great place to have discussions with faculty on, what should the quiz questions be, or what should the overviews be for a module, things like that, or a rubric. You can even get a first crack at a rubric in a certain area with Chat GPT. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, I would say, I think that it was Michael Feldstein, I think, in his Imperial, I forget what he calls his blog, but the Imperial Educators Project, if you Google him, he talked a lot about AI. This was even before, this was last fall. He was talking about AI as a trusted, really fast colleague. That, and I think we need to start training our students to begin making responsible and ethical use of AI, and in ways that help to elevate their potential and their opportunities. I see an awful lot of promise, in addition to the things that are scary, but I see an awful lot of promise of AI becoming an equalizer, particularly for learners whose second language is English. I think it's thinking hard about our assignments and how we, to Kurt's point, build critical thinking skills by having them, maybe they go ahead and feed the prompt that we've given them directly into the chat GPT. And then the assignment is for them to critically analyze the response that chat GPT gave. There's lots of ways that we can help them begin to really build their information literacy skills. They're thinking about how to make really good use and responsible use of this as a tool, that I think we need to be thinking about as we move forward with this.
Yeah, I truly love it as a way of guiding students through some of the process of, kind of what is that outline? What would that look like? Or especially MJ, when you said, maybe we should make them analyze what they find out of it, because does it make sense? So and it makes me think back a long time ago when I taught algebra 1, and when I told students to work out the problem, and does it make sense? Does your answer make sense? And so when you think about the use of AI to develop an outline or look at what it brings back to you as a paper, or a short essay on something that you put into it with the prompt, being able to go back and think through that, and or utilize that and now build on it. How do you get the right resources to justify maybe what AI did give you? How do you know that? So, but I think it comes down to really looking at it as those formative steps to get you to the point where you are now showing your mastery of those particular skills. And if it's an English class, maybe one of those skills is to be able to, read through something critically and know if it is accurate, or if there are other information you may need to put into it to make it a full reply to what it is that you're supposed to be looking at. So I know that there are lots of stuff going on over in the chat. It's been great kind of watching that. Sometimes it's going by so fast that I haven't been able to keep up with all of it. So when it comes to thinking of it, so obviously formatively, being able to get students there, guiding them through the process, maybe even guiding them through that reflection process. But when it comes to actually summatives, where do you see AI fitting into that summative that the students are going to be turning in as their show of mastery of those competencies? Do you see it playing a role in that as well, or just more of a formative assessment coming through? Either anyone.
I've got to see it first. So I'm seeing it as a starting point for students if they're working on their final project or things like that. Maybe they'll use it for a starting point, but maybe I'm old school. But I'd like to talk with the chat GPT guys and say, can you please put a little wheel saying, this is a hard question, let me think about it, versus like, it's right there. It's like, how can how can they do that so fast? Yeah.
I guess I don't differentiate between the formative and the summative, because I think, if your question is getting at concerns about misuse of the tools, it's going to be as harmful at the formative stage as it is at the summative stage. So I don't know that I distinguish between the two. I think it really depends on the learning outcomes and what you're trying to have learners demonstrate in this. One of actually our colleagues at UMGC has talked, who leads the writing courses, has talked a lot, for example, about learning to write versus writing to learn. And, I think that's two very different perspectives on, the times at which we might ask students and allow students to engage a large language model or generative AI as part of a writing assignment. And when it's not appropriate for them to be utilizing it, then I think we have to think hard about the assessments that we create to make sure that they are AI proof. At least so far, AI is being, at least ChatGPT is being pretty honest about, I'm sorry, I don't have any personal experiences. So if you build personal experience, and point to examples of personal experiences in your assessment prompt, then I think that starts to make it a little more difficult for them to utilize AI to generate a response. But I'm kind of with Kurt as well. I mean, I've been using, when I get stuck, somebody's asked me to write something and I don't know where to start. First thing I've done for years is go out to Google or something, do a Google search, try to find some inspiration and some thinking about, where I want to go with something. I'm not obviously plagiarizing from that. I'm utilizing it as a starting point. So I don't have a lot of difficulty with students doing that. I think the question becomes, how much are they relying on it, and to what extent does this eventually short circuit learning processes that we believe need to be happening? And it really reminds me, I remember my father absolutely freaking out when my uncle sent me in 1970 something my very first Texas Instruments calculator, and Dad thought I was never ever going to be able to do math. Turns out he was wrong. I can do math, but what I don't remember is my multiplication table. So, it turned out okay. So we'll see. So, I wrestle with this. I wrestle with the fact that we don't really understand exactly what is being short-circuited here. And I think that's something that we're going to really want to monitor closely.
No, and great segue into kind of my next thought was, how do we build those assessments? Because obviously we have to have the assessment for the students to do something. So how can we build it in a way that, of course, my first thought is, help guide the students through it. That you could actually, in your assessment, you could say, you need to, this is the outcomes, these are the things that you need to demonstrate and you need to give to them, to turn in. But maybe here at this point, you may want to go out and do a little bit of research. I mean, if it's Google or if it's, ChatGPT, or if it's wherever it is, how do you go and find that? So how would you put together an assessment that, I don't want to say is AI proof, because we probably will never get to that point, but how should faculty be thinking about these assessments now that, at this point when AI is out there, people are using it, and
yeah, we definitely look at making sure that our assessments are open-ended in terms of having the students really share their personal experiences, making connections that are detailed enough that it's not a high superficial level, but really not just what is the management theory, how is it applied in your workplace, how do you see it playing out in the future, is it still applicable? So they're going through all of these stages. Where AI could maybe assist in the grading portion is if we said, all papers must have, 5 citations in APA formatting, or there's certain types of pieces like that, a page length requirement or something. Maybe AI might be able to indicate those that already are not meeting the baseline requirements. So then a faculty member knows that these would be not passing versus passing papers, just based on the requirements of that instruction. But definitely that's one thing we've tried to do is really focus on making it as application-based as possible. Even with Turnitin, for example, that we were able to see that the students are authentic in their examples. And at the graduate level, we see a lot more of that application piece because they are typically applying it directly to their workforce, current work, or potential future work, or developing a portfolio. At the undergraduate level is maybe where there's more challenge with that area.
I love that. MJ or Kurt, do you have any thoughts on how to
Well, I
build
did. I thought I'd real quick comment. There was something flew by in the chat just a second ago about, is all of this just writing based? Doesn't CB need to be performance based as well? We do have a tendency when we're talking about AI to jump straight to the writing piece because that's what we're seeing most of so far. If anybody's tried out DALL-E yet, at least so far I haven't been able to get it to work very well for me. But there are lots of others. The coding, there's one on coding. There's whole bunches of large language models, but that do other things as well. So yes, eventually I think the question is pertinent to many different kinds of performance, based assessments. I guess, one other quick thing that, and this kind of gets back to the earlier question about building in some of the higher order skills. Rhonda, as I know, summative assessment doesn't just come, popping in out of thin air. I mean, hopefully if the course has been well designed, if the program has been well designed, this is a culmination of a lot of activities that have been happening throughout the entire course. So, I think we can also think hard about how we draw upon the earlier assignments, even ask students to, continue to build as they get towards the summative assessments. So now that you've done all these pieces, put it all together into this final performance-based activity. That also, really helps, I think, quite a bit to support both the students' learning and also to, if we're really trying to make it ChatGPT proof, to accomplish some of that too.
The one thing I was thinking, so one of the programs I've just recently helped get HLC accreditation is a water treatment program. And I'm so blown away by the amount of learning those students have to do. They're like chemists, biologists, mathematicians, and machine repair people, right? They need to know all this. But in the industry they're in, there's a lot of these kids that come in, so the students don't have to learn how to mix certain things sometimes, but they have to show that they know that to get certified by the state. So it's high stakes for them to not skip corners and maybe use ChatGPT to like answer the question when they have to really have that fundamental knowledge of what chemicals and what kind of reaction, what percentage of this and that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it takes me, to the and couple courses I'm teaching right now that is, they have to, implement a technology, but they have to do it in a specific location that they find and in a specific way and alignment, and yes, you can go out there and because some people may have problems. Okay, I'm trying to figure out really how something aligns with something else. See what if it's ChatGPT or one of the others out there, let's see what they say. What does that alignment look like? But then being able to take that and that small little piece that, okay, I think I have this. Now we need to put it into something bigger, right? And so I love that idea of being able to obviously make it very authentic. And, as we were talking about at the graduate level, sometimes it's a little easier to do, but even at the undergraduate level or even certifications or any of that, there are times that the students definitely need to show that application of whatever it is that they're learning into that. And I know, Monica, you talked a lot about definitely the alignment between that industry and those courses that y'all developed. it just seems like that just plays right into it, right? Okay, yeah, you can use these different AI technologies to do these little pieces, but as you pull it all together, you know, it it's a
Right,
bigger.
exactly. And our big question is, what would somebody be doing in the field? So for example, for our data scientists or our data analysts, for those types of program competencies and courses, they need to wrangle raw data. So they need to work with the instructor, find a raw data file and wrangle the data, and then make a meaningful presentation, an oral presentation that's recorded, so we can see them doing the work, doing the steps, and presenting it as if they would do that in their own department or their team. Because we try to tell them the data is important, but it's the communication of the data that will move things forward in your organization. So you have to have both the hard and soft skill sets. Similarly, in business, I gave an example in the chat that with marketing, for example, you have to be able to come up with a marketing plan. So an idea, choose a product, how would you market it? How would you pitch it? Who's the target audience? So there's a full scale kind of development process and framework that happens there, because that's what they'll do in industry. They need to be able to create copy. They need to be able to produce the copy and pitch that copy to a target audience. So they demonstrate that as well. So we really look at what are they going to be doing in the field, and how do we mirror that within our assessments so that it makes it more meaningful for the student and also for employers. Because in a competency-based framework, sometimes employers may not understand what that means. They see a transcript, but students sometimes may want to explain what they did in their program, and this helps them to have a portfolio of projects and work beyond just written papers that really helps them to demonstrate that mastery.
Definitely. It's interesting, and when you get into industry, anytime you're doing something, every time we all talk about, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? And I really think that this allows people to do that exactly. They go and take things that may be out there, because it is, and how can then you take that and make it your own and apply it in a way that makes sense, right? So I think it gives them that extra level of skill set of being able to find that resource or find that information, and then take it and meld it into what they see fits, either their industry or their profession or their company or corporation. So yeah, it's one of the things that I think that many times when it comes to assessments, and I think we do a better job now than we've done maybe years ago, is really looking at, as Erin says, different ways of doing this. We don't have to write everything, or maybe there's a writing piece to it, but with that, you need to, present it, or you need to, record something, or create an image of something, or an infographic, or there's so many different ways that I think that we can do it now. But there will be AI out there. MJ, you look like you're against it.
Yeah, Rhonda, if I could maybe jump in on one other point that we haven't addressed. For those of us who are instructional designers in the room, I think you'll resonate on this. I've always found one of the most mundane instructional design tasks is to come up with multiple items for quizzes, and particularly test banks and discussion prompts and those sorts of things, either because we have academic integrity concerns and we're trying to rotate through them, or just because we want to make sure stuff stays fresh. We, of course, at UMGC have lots and lots and lots of adjuncts. I would love to see a day where I can, Rhonda, if you're teaching for us, be able to say to you, hey, pick from among these 10 discussion prompts that, all assess the same thing, but have slightly different variations and examples that you may be more familiar, or you may feel more comfortable, providing support for, and so forth, so that we also build the faculty voice back into at least our model at scale. So, that's another place where I think AI can be, within this context of developing assessments, can be tremendously helpful. There are lots of those sorts of things where I could see us, leveraging the LMS to rotate through test banks and things almost automatically if there was a large language model embedded in there, and it could manage that for us. So some other things that we have our eyes on too that I think can be useful when we think about large language models in the context of assessments.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because a minute ago when someone was saying something, I thought exactly of that, MJ, and then it went out of my head. But yeah, I think that being able to, not only even with quiz banks, but even with the idea that you may have honestly different prompts for the same type of activity, right? So you want people to do something around this particular topic, but what are some of the different ways that you can share with your students, different ways that they could do it? And I think that you could definitely go out and use, um, LLMs to be able to really figure out what are the different ways that I can say this, or we can present it to students, or we can have students do something. Sorry, keep wanting to look over at the chat and see what's going on. That's fine. So yeah, I think that being able to determine those different possibilities and for students, and even as a faculty member, when I give students something that is a little bit more authentic, it makes it a lot more exciting for my end too, because I'm not reading the exact same thing over and over, or watching or doing something exactly the same every single time as a faculty member as well. But even as a faculty member, how many people love to give feedback? Love to give feedback. Sometimes it's like, okay, not exactly what, what would be the best feedback. And then as a faculty member, you could actually utilize that as well to be able to, maybe present different views or different options back to students as you're giving feedback back to them. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts about, let's reverse it and just look at it as a faculty member?
I like the idea.
Yeah, because
Especially
I
when
know.
we talk so much about the authentic assessment, right? And Monica, I totally agree with you. The thing is, it's a lot more work on faculty, right? To do all the feedback and look at all those individual projects and stuff. So yeah, any kind of ability to kind of shift a little bit of that work off the faculty members' plate, but still contribute to a really good learning experience is something to look at.
Yeah, I love Phil's note here. Our bot can grade their bot's answer to our bot created prompt. Yeah, yeah. There's that. I love that. I used to so it's been a little. I have not taught for a little while. Prior to being at UMGC, I was at our system office here in Maryland for many years. So it's been a little while. But even then, I would, as I was going, and it was in instructional design and technology was my discipline. I would, as I was going through students' projects, keep a Word document open where, because I was starting to see some of the same concerns over and over. Now, I didn't copy and paste directly, as I started for myself to develop my explanation for what I was seeing that was, needed feedback or correction or whatever, and I was honing that explanation, I wanted to capture that. So, I would hang on to that Word doc and have it open. And actually there were times I would hang on to it term over term because, I was seeing some of the same kinds of things as instructional designers were developing. And of course, trying to build some of that back into making sure they didn't make the mistake in the first place by redesigning the course. But it's a long way of saying that, here again, I think utilizing ChatGPT as a trusted colleague looking over your shoulder who can generate some of this text a little more quickly, keep you from having to think, over and over, gosh, how am I going to word this a little more nicely, and start with the positive, and make sure that it doesn't all sound so negative. And, I think it can help with those kinds of things. But I do worry a little bit. We know, at least at this point in time, we see it in the writing that it generates from our prompts, that it's pretty shallow. It's pretty buzzwordy, jargony, those sorts of things. And what I don't want to see happen is that we start then feeding that back that way to our students. So I think it's Kurt's idea of it being a starting point is great, but then we still have to be actively engaged in making sure the feedback we're giving our students is top notch.
Yeah, I really like the idea of being able to say, these are some of the things that I can say or provide good feedback, but then how do you make it personalized, right? How do you make sure that when you put it in there, the student knows that, okay, I did read it. I didn't just want to throw some things in there, and I authentically really care about how you're putting it together, what you're doing, and want to give you that feedback back to you. So as we tell our students, it's a starting point, right? It's a way to get us started. So we have just a few more minutes left. And so I'm going to allow our wonderful panelists here to do any final tidbit that you would want to share with people before we close.
Thinking about technology and new technologies, there's going to be those that will be resisting it and others that will be like early adopters. And what typically ends up happening is it'll be used and there will be like norms of behavior established. And I think we're not at that point yet, but we're experimenting and seeing some cool things.
Thank you, Kurt. MJ, any words?
I was hoping Monica would jump in while I'm still thinking about what my final thoughts are. We covered a lot here. I think, understanding exactly the intersection here between the AI and assessment of CBE is still very much an open-ended question. I will say that, and we didn't get into this at all, but, as we're really starting to understand skills and where they fall as a hierarchy in our curriculum, AI is not too good at that yet. We've tried. We're trying to get that to help us make sense of skills hierarchies and taxonomies. I'm hopeful that at some point it can help with that too. Anyway, I think there's a lot here still remaining to unpack, and I'm optimistic and excited about the potential for the future.
Thank you.
And I agree with what my colleagues have noted. I want to see where the future leads with AI and how this will impact our competency-based programs. But I'm also positive and looking ahead at all of these changes.
Thank you. So I definitely want to thank Monica and MJ and Kurt for joining me in this discussion of CBE assessments and AI and how that all comes together, and hope to see y'all at a future webinar. Thank y'all very much.
Bye.